There's a car sitting in a warehouse in Long Beach, California in the winter of 1982. Stainless steel body, gull-wing doors frozen shut. Nobody's coming to buy it. The company that built it doesn't exist anymore. And 3,000 miles away, in a Los Angeles courtroom, the man who built that car is watching FBI footage of himself agreeing to help finance a $24 million cocaine deal. That's the real ending of the DeLorean Motor Company. And here's what makes it almost impossible to believe. 3 years later, that same failed car would be strapped with a flux capacitor, hit 88 miles an hour on a movie screen, and become one of the most famous vehicles ever filmed. A commercial disaster turned cultural icon. So how does a General Motors golden boy, the man credited with inventing the muscle car, end up broke and indicted, while the car with his name on it becomes immortal? Borrowed engineering, borrowed government money. A founder whose last desperate move to save everything guaranteed he'd lose it. This is the downfall of DeLorean Motor Company. John Z. DeLorean did not look like any other executive in Detroit. By 40, he was the youngest division chief in General Motors history, a man who wore Italian suits and played saxophone in the boardroom. He turned Pontiac from a fading brand into the hottest ticket in America, greenlighting the 1964 GTO by sneaking a big block V8 into a mid-size chassis against direct orders from GM's own rulebook. The GTO exploded onto the scene, igniting the muscle car era and making DeLorean's name synonymous with raw power and rebellion. He followed with the Firebird and Grand Prix, cementing his legend as the architect of speed. The press loved his rock star persona, but beneath the headlines, GM's vast machinery, its engineers, its capital, its quality control, quietly made it all possible. DeLorean's fame was real, but so was the invisible safety net of the world's biggest automaker, a net he would soon try to live without. In 1973, John DeLorean walked away from the comfort of General Motors and set out to build his own car, a machine that would stand for something more than horsepower and profit. He called it the DMC-12, named for the $12,000 price he believed would make it a car for the people, not just the privileged. But vision alone could not fill an empty factory. DeLorean needed credibility, and he found it by borrowing the best names in the business. He turned to Giorgetto Giugiaro, the Italian designer behind some of the world's most striking cars, to sketch the DMC-12's razor-edged body. For the chassis, he made a deal with Colin Chapman of Lotus, whose engineering genius gave the car its backbone. Even the engine was borrowed, a 2.85-liter V6, cobbled together by Peugeot, Renault, and Volvo. The money, too, came from outside. Government grants, development funds, and promises made in the shadow of a recession. Piece by piece, DeLorean stitched together a company from borrowed design, borrowed engineering, and borrowed government money. A beautiful blueprint, but one that rested on foundations he never truly owned. The DMC-12 arrived in a shimmer of brushed stainless steel, a car that looked as if it had driven out of tomorrow. Its body panels, never painted, promised freedom from rust and fading, the kind of permanence that could outlast fashion or weather. But that same steel added weight and cost, and every scratch or fingerprint lingered in plain sight. The gull-wing doors, lifted high on twin hydraulic struts, drew crowds and headlines, bold, cinematic, and instantly iconic. Yet behind the spectacle, those doors were a headache for engineers and owners alike, heavy, expensive, and all too often stuck in place. Hype gathered around the car's silhouette, around the dream of something different, before a single buyer had the chance to live with it. The DMC-12's allure was real, but so were the compromises, welded into every panel before the first test drive ever began. In the late 1970s, the search for a home for DeLorean's dream car led far from Detroit's assembly lines. Northern Ireland, battered by sectarian violence, and crippled by unemployment, became the unlikely stage for an American automotive fantasy. The British government, desperate to buy stability in a region on the brink, offered more than $100 million in public funds to lure DeLorean's factory to Dunmurry, just outside Belfast. This was not a decision grounded in automotive expertise or industrial logic. It was a political bargain, a bet that jobs could buy peace. The promise? Thousands of new positions for a workforce with almost no experience building cars. The reality? A brand new plant filled with hope, tension, and inexperience. Every panel, every weld, every finished car carried the weight of public money and political urgency. Before a single DMC-12 reached a showroom, the fate of the project was already tangled in forces far larger than engineering or design. The gamble was clear. Industrial salvation for a troubled land, but at the cost of entrusting an unproven company and an untested workforce with millions in taxpayer funds. Production began in January 1981, and almost immediately, the gap between promise and reality became impossible to ignore. The PRV V6 engine, sourced from Peugeot, Renault, and Volvo, managed just 130 horsepower on paper, less in practice, leaving the DMC-12 with a 0 to 60 time that stretched past 10 seconds in independent tests. This missed DeLorean's own claim of 8.8 seconds, a small number that now loomed large. The Lotus redesign, intended to sharpen the car's performance, instead saddled it with nearly 500 extra pounds. The stainless steel body, so striking in the showroom, made the car heavy and sluggish on the road. Dealers braced for backlash. To stave off disaster, DeLorean Motor Company set up quality assurance centers in California, New Jersey, and Michigan. Expensive triage units where cars were stripped, reworked, and rebuilt before buyers ever saw them. Welding defects, door misalignments, electrical gremlins, and interior rattles became routine corrections. Later production runs saw some improvement, but the damage was done. The cost of rework soared, and every car that left the factory carried the scars of a rushed and troubled birth. For every gleaming panel, there was a warranty claim waiting in the shadows, and for every bold promise, a disappointment measured in seconds and dollars. The DMC-12 was supposed to be the affordable dream, a stainless steel sports car for $12,000, within reach of anyone who believed in the future. But by the time the first car reached American showrooms, the price had nearly doubled. At $25,000, the DeLorean parked itself alongside the Porsche 911 and the Corvette, cars with pedigrees, power, and loyal buyers. For enthusiasts chasing performance, the DMC-12's 130 horsepower and sluggish acceleration were a deal-breaker. For the style-conscious, the price was simply too high. DeLorean Motor Company needed to sell at least 10,000 cars a year just to break even. Instead, production ramped up just as the U.S. economy slid into recession. Interest rates soared to 17%, loans dried up, buyers vanished. Dealers, once eager for a piece of the spectacle, now received telegrams pleading for bulk purchases, cash up front, any help to keep the company alive. The silence was deafening. In the end, fewer than 9,000 DMC-12s ever left the factory, each one a polished promise stranded by the tide. By early 1982, DeLorean Motor Company was gasping for air. The last hope came in the form of a new holding company and a planned $27 million stock issue, a lifeline that needed the blessing of regulators and the confidence of private investors. The Securities and Exchange Commission hesitated, and the offering collapsed before a single share could be sold. Bank of America, already on edge over unpaid loans, sued for repayment and demanded nearly 2,000 unsold cars as collateral. Across the Atlantic, British government aid was frozen until a private backer could be found, but no one stepped forward. The doors were closing, and even John DeLorean's talent for persuasion could not conjure capital from a room gone silent. On October 19, 1982, John DeLorean sat in a Los Angeles hotel room, caught on FBI videotape, as he agreed to fund a $24 million cocaine deal. The briefcase on the table was filled with powder, but the real currency was desperation. The promise that this money could save his company, keep the Belfast factory alive, and rescue thousands of jobs. Within days, the receivers padlocked the Dunmurry plant. Bank accounts froze. DeLorean Motor Company of America filed for bankruptcy less than a week later. The scandal and the shutdown became inseparable, one last, irreversible chain reaction. In court, DeLorean's lawyers argued entrapment, that the government had staged the crime, and the jury agreed. In August 1984, he was acquitted on all counts, never convicted. But the verdict could not resurrect the company. The car survived, the dream did not. The factory gates in Dunmurry closed on a cold October day, leaving nearly 3,000 workers without jobs, and Northern Ireland with a hollow promise where hope once stood. Over $100 million in public investment evaporated, and the plant, once hailed as a symbol of renewal, sat empty, a monument to ambition and absence. But the car itself refused to vanish. In Texas, Stephen Wynn quietly gathered the scattered bones of DeLorean's dream, buying up leftover parts and creating a new company to keep the surviving DMC-12s on the road. Then, in 1985, Back to the Future cast the failed car as a time machine, transforming a commercial flop into a legend. While better-selling rivals faded, the DeLorean became a collectible, its brushed steel and gull-wing doors now immortal, a paradox in polished metal, outlasting the company that built it. Gull-wing doors rise in memory, not in showrooms. DeLorean was acquitted, never convicted, yet his name became shorthand for ambition on borrowed time, design, engineering, and even fate. If a company dies, but its failure becomes legend, was it truly a failure? For stories like this, subscribe for more.